Great. We have our next speaker, Jared Pyka. Did I say that right?
Yes.
All right, great. He's with ValleyCrest, and he'll be looking at some of the commercial aspects of soil.
Hey, before I get started, just to kind of know which way to go here, just quick show of hands. How many folks here are contractors or maintenance professionals, that type of business? And then, city, government, home, design only, landscape architects, a little bit everybody. Homeowners? Everybody's a homeowner. Renter, live somewhere. So these pictures up here, kind of what I was trying to show here is just on, as a contractor, we specialize in kind of the large scale developments, specifically commercial, office buildings, mixed use, retail. We also work when they develop new subdivisions, master plan communities. So we're a little more focused on that larger scale where we receive a site that might look something like one of these. On the far left, there's a master plan community. The middle is the commercial office building, and then far right is actually the Seaholm power plant redevelopment. This was probably about a year ago. So we're working with something a little different than, typically if you pull up to an existing residence that may already have some landscaping or has a site that generally has some vegetation. A little bit about myself. I guess this is really more kind of an agenda and just kind of a funny picture there showing you some soil. But that's my little boy there. And that's basically where I got started on this, helping my mom and dad. I grew up in Georgetown. That's where I was born and raised. Grew up on the west side of the interstate, so I got to live on the rocks. And now I make my home on the east side downtown in the Blackland gumbo clay. So the soil stuff's really close to my heart. I operated a maintenance business in Georgetown for about 7 years. Worked in the native plant propagating and growing industry for quite a while, and took some classes at Texas Tech about plant and soil science, and then ended up here working for ValleyCrest as a business developer. So I kind of get to tie it all together, which is pretty fun. Betty's going to probably roll her eyes here, but there's our soil triangle. I kind of think part of this whole entire soil conversation that we have is really, you've got to have the foundation. You got to understand the real basics of it. And you may already understand it, so forgive me if I'm telling you the same thing twice. But what I kind of want people to understand, I guess, is when you go out to a job site, you really need to look at what's there before you can even start to make decisions on what you need to do regarding soil. There's soil testing. There's literally just digging 6 inches with a shovel. There's a lot of different ways you can get an idea, but you need to look at what you've got, and you need to determine kind of what your structure, texture, and what the ideal soil is for what you're trying to do. It can be pretty variable depending on what your goals are. Let's go back one here. So, I just Googled this to try to get a quick, easy definition that would fit on a slide here. But, what is soil? Soil are really, it's minerals. It's broken down rock. That's what soil is. And as that happens, you get different particle sizes, which make up your texture and your structure. If you look at the three basic parts, which are sand, silt, and clay, all soil out, no matter where you're at, is really a mixture of those things, unless you're on the beach or you're in a kind of an artificial environment where somebody's hauled in a bunch of stuff that wasn't there naturally. What I think is the most important thing about that triangle is just to show that the proportions aren't equal. In order to get a good soil, which is like a good sandy loam, you don't really need very much clay at all, because clay kind of takes over everything else. You really need more sand, more silt, and a little bit of clay. And I don't know, that may not be the best triangle, but I think I'm probably preaching to the choir here. You guys probably know this. Really, what we're more concerned with on the commercial sites, especially where we're dealing with like a moonscape, like I showed earlier, is really the structure and not getting soil that's compacted, and you're going to be planting into something that nothing has a chance to survive. So some of the things that you have to consider when you're bringing in soil or you're amending existing soil, even if you're going to plant directly into what's existing, if it's suitable, you need good infiltration. And basically that's just allowing air and water to move through the soil freely. If your soil is very compacted, your water can't go in, obviously. It's going to sheet and run off. But the same thing applies to air, too. You need air to move through there. You need organisms to be able to move freely through the soil. Those are a lot of things sometimes we don't always take into consideration when we drive up to a job site and go to lay sod or install plants. I want to take a minute to kind of tie this to water a little bit. The infiltration and all these things are important because you want that water to go down. You don't want it to go across and off your site. So one of the things that you're always striving for in your soil is water retention. So I'll back up one bullet here to field capacity, saturation, all these types of things. So when you get a big rain like we had, a few weeks ago is when it all kind of stopped, but all the soil around here was completely saturated, meaning all the pore space where there could be air, organisms, whatever, it's completely full of water during that rain event and slightly afterwards. So then when the rain stops and you give it 1 or 2 days, gravity takes over, and about 50% of that water can be lost just through gravity. The soil just does not have the ability to hold 100% of that water that fell on it. So it either goes downhill or directly into the ground aquifers. That's a good thing. But the water that the soil can hang on to, that's your water retention. And field capacity would be when you're starting off with the maximum. The maximum amount of water is retained. So, in a blackland prairie situation or in a cornfield where those guys all east of town are growing stuff, you got a really high field capacity. That's what makes that such good land for farming. You get over here west of town, it has to do with soil depth and also the makeup of the soil. It's a little more sandy and gravelly. You just don't have that retention. You lose so much more of your water just due to gravity. So those are the things that you're always striving to improve, or maybe improve isn't the right word. You're trying to create what you want to create for your plant type. So the diagram here, I'm not sure if you can see that. It's a little bit blurry, but it kind of shows the different soil types there and some aspects of each one. So when you go out to your job site, you want to look at what you have. And again, a soil test is a great way to do this. There's a lot of different labs you can send things off to. I won't get into all that. But you really need to know where you're starting, and then you need to look at what your intention is and what you're trying to grow, whether it's agaves, cactus, sedum, things like that, or are you trying to grow corn or who knows what, right? So in a lot of the job sites that ValleyCrest rolls up on, a commercial specifically, the general contractor has usually had to do a lot of site grading. They've pretty well wiped the place completely clean, or they've had to cut it lower or fill it up to make the grades all work for the buildings and parking lots and all that kind of stuff, utilities and things. There's some sites it's a combination of both. This particular picture here is the La Cantera Hill Country Resort in San Antonio. So you can kind of see what they've done there. I mean, they wiped out the entire landscape area. They actually cut it down anywhere from 5 feet to, even deeper in some places. And then you had a concrete truck drive all over it, and bulldozers and graders, and every contractor that does plumbing and electricity and everything else. So this is an example of where you're not going to try to amend that. That would be pretty impossible. It's mostly road-based that's been hauled in. So we want to import soil. And the type of soil you import, now this is actually kind of a bonus of a site like this, even though there's a lot of negatives about what you see right there. you get to create your environment, which is pretty cool. The other situation that you do imported soil like this would be when you're doing a rooftop, container plantings, bioswales, some of the other things that Betty mentioned and also Chris mentioned through the city. Those are all examples where you're pretty much creating the environment from scratch. The other thing here would be we've done some botanical gardens and things around the country, and that's also where you're just creating a artificial environment, so unique plantings. Another piece of this puzzle that's starting to gain traction is structural soil, and I don't know how much experience everyone has with that, but we're using it downtown in a lot of urban projects. And the structural soil is created by Cornell University. It's a mixture of rock and organics. And the idea is angular rock can support weight around trees and things, and you can put a hardscape over the top of it while allowing the tree's roots to be able to move through all the pores in that angular rock and all the organic material there. So I wish I had a better picture. I desperately tried to find something that could try to illustrate how that works, but I think we're all going to see more of that. So this photo here, believe it or not, is at the Circuit of the Americas. Around the backsides and the perimeter of the property, we restored the Blackland Prairie. So this would be an example of where you would not want to import soil. You'd want to amend what's existing. Mainly it's the sheer volume of acreage, several hundred acres. Also the fact that land really was barely disturbed. They had a few temporary storage areas for different contractors. They had piles of pipe and various things. But the soil itself was in pretty good shape. So the landscape architects decided it would be much better to go out there and spread a little compost and use native plant seed to kind of jumpstart that environment back to what it used to be before all that construction happened. Some other situations you can do this would be in a residential setting if you're doing like a landscape renovation project more than a new home construction where it is all compacted and construction debris everywhere. There's a lot of different soil amendments. I didn't really want to get into all the details of that. I think the local suppliers can probably be your best resource on what to do and what's available. But on these large scales, you really have to think about what's most efficient. I wanted to talk a little bit more about the green roof soils because that's becoming so popular. And I think as you guys are doing more and more work around the city with more folks coming downtown and a lot of urban infill projects, you're going to see more, not always a green roof. We typically just say on structure. In this particular case, this is also at Seaholm. This is actually flush with the existing grade of all the land around, but there's a 4-story parking garage underneath this. So technically it's a roof planting. This is going to be a green event lawn. And I'm not sure if it's open to the public quite yet, but you might be able to go walk on it right now and see the finished product. But this is actually about 18 to 20 inches of special soil mix brought in. And what you don't see underneath all of this is the various drainage structures and things because it is on a rooftop. But the considerations here are a little bit different than your typical job site on grade where you're either amending or importing soil. You have to start thinking here about weight on the structure, and you have to consider drainage because of that weight. I think Betty mentioned a cubic foot of water is like 8 gallons, and a gallon of water is, 8 or 9 pounds, something like that. So when you start doing these volumes of planters and we get a 6-inch rain, that adds up really fast, and you have to start thinking, can that structure hold that much weight? I mean, you're talking tons and tons and tons focused on this one area. So you use a unique soil that will hold water to a point, but we're talking about that water retention factor. You don't want it to retain too much water. Typically, I'm just going to kind of throw some shoot from the hip ballparks. You'll have to get soil tests done to get this exact when you're talking structural loads. But dry soil for one of these rooftop plantings or even in a potted plant type soil, can be like 40 to 50 pounds a cubic foot. When you get it fully saturated with water, it shoots up to over 100 pounds. So it basically doubles or can even go higher than that, depending on your soil mix. So you can see how it gets out of hand pretty quick. Underneath all of this, like I said, there's various drainage systems that get that water that gravity pulls out away from it fast. But you really have to be, really have to be considerate about that saturated weight and what that maximum is. Let's see. I guess the other thought about these on-structure plantings, I'm doing a presentation on soil, but you really need to look at what type of plant material you're putting up there, because the whole thing works together, right? If you're trying to get that soil to drain a little bit faster, you really don't want to put lush tropical stuff up there that you're going to constantly struggle with. So that's just kind of a design point there. So these are a couple of different examples here, of a success story. On the left, there's actually the UT Belo project, and some of that's actually on structure, some of it's not. But that's a bioswale there. It shows how 100% imported soil that was mixed off-site can produce really amazing results with all native plantings. You just need to be careful, what kind of soil you're bringing in. On the right is in San Antonio at the Hipólito Garcia Federal Courthouse, and that's actually all a roof planting. And the plant material there was selected for the soil that roof could support. So kind of a structural engineering project. So, in summary, I guess really as a commercial contractor, and also when you're doing residential new installation work, you always want to strive to create the right soil for that environment and the type of plants you're planting, the drainage, all of these factors. It's not as cut and dry as there's a perfect soil that you want to use for every application, and it works at every job site no matter what you're doing. You just spread it and go. I think that's a misconception that you buy garden mix or whatever, and just that's it. I guess an important point I want to make too. We do a lot of things as contractors to make landscapes look good instantly, but I think anytime you have the opportunity to work on this over time, it's a better approach. Being a sales guy, I don't want any of our clients necessarily to hear that, because you want to make money and make things look great on day one. But I think if you spend more money on the soil portion of it, that's your foundation. You can downsize all your perennials to 1 gallons and even 4-inch. If you've got really good soil and you've got this whole system working and all the things that Betty talked about, mycorrhizae and all the organisms and all the organics, everything functioning right, your results are going to be, tenfold what they would be if you go and get the cheapest loam you can buy for $2 a yard, plant into it, and then constantly try to supplement with fertilizers and chemicals and all these different things to try to make it right after the fact.
In order to appeal to clients that way, could you set up like a spreadsheet that would show the client this would be your cost savings of fertilizers and water over time versus if you go for 5 to 10 gallons? But have you ever done that to try to appeal?
We really haven't, and the reason I haven't personally is on the commercial contracting side, we typically install the soil, the plants, all of the aspects of the landscape per the landscape architect's drawings, and I'm not involved on the design side like that. So we're kind of put into a bit of a box there as a contractor. But on the landscape, I can speak to it just being that I associate with those folks on a regular basis. I think that would be really interesting to see. I don't think it's as simple as just a cost savings that you can show on a spreadsheet necessarily. There's a lot of other factors involved too, the aesthetics and how fast do you want to see results and all of those types of things. So it gets, yeah.
Yeah, because it's definitely well known now that the smaller the plant is, it will actually surpass the growth of the other plants.
Sure.
Because it will establish a lot faster. And
No, I like it. That's a good angle, and that's This is why I like groups with all the landscape folks, including myself and growers and all this.
I've worked with a lot of landscape architects, and I know what you're saying, is that they're always oversizing, big, huge plants and all that, because they do want that instant bang factor, and they could go take their pictures, and then they walk away. But, it not only just cost savings, but if you could come in and say, this is our 3-year plan to integrate this all in phases, because it's not just about the smaller plant sizes, but maybe coming in 6 months from then and boosting up the soil again, and adding more
Sure.
nutrients.
Yeah, more of it as
like
a maintenance program ongoing.
Yeah, because it takes at least 2 years to really get plants established, to have a follow-up care, that would really benefit, the smaller plants, and really to encourage them to get growing faster.
Yeah, and a challenge we face when we talk to a client and show them all the costs broken out for their commercial landscape that might be $3 million, they look at the line items and they see the big giant number on soil, and they say, why do I really need 18 inches of soil? Doesn't that seem just like ridiculous? I could just go get this at the And we have to, it's our duty, it's ethical, it's not just our company, but, to our industry. We don't want to go that route and cheap out and have poor results. And then, you sour that with the client, and they see this native landscape that's not performing, and then they start to think that's the problem.
Exactly.
Then they start to blame the designer. And so I think the soil is something you really shouldn't mess with too much when you're looking at budget items.
My plans always say no sandy loam whatsoever.
Yeah.
Because that kills it, especially for the plants I'm going to be planting there, hill country plants.
Sure.
And because that's not topsoil, this is subsoil.
Yeah, and this is kind of a similar topic. I've done a few, or been to some seminars, done a few talks too about irrigation, and the question is, well, how much do I water, right? Yeah. It's the same type of topic where there's no right answer. It's kind of a nonstop experiment. We're all learning, but we're using the best practices we all know at this point, right? And in every situation, every job site, you have different slopes. You have different sunlight issues because of buildings, shading things, whatever. There's so many variables that you really have to look at each individual scenario.
And the truth is, while you're out there doing an installation, many times you're going to find those little microclimates and discover them as you go.
Absolutely.
And I'm always into tweaking it as you go.
Yeah, and so that kind of, I guess, brings me to a little bit of kind of a final point is there's this nasty little problem with all of this, and it's money. So in a perfect world, when I was working as a grower and all these things, you could grow the perfect native plant and the perfect soil media, and everything was wonderful, but you had to then sell it for $45 for a 1-gallon plant, right? So that's the variable to all of this that makes it a real challenge. And that goes back to a little bit when I talked about bringing in new soil or amending existing and all the above. You really need to look at all these individual variables and tailor what you're going to do for your particular site. Yes, Denise?
What mix did you use for that native plant?
That particular one was a type of bioswale. If I remember right, Christine Tenike was the landscape architect, so I'll give her credit there for that, of course. It was a mixture of expanded shale, coarse or sharp sand. It had compost, humus, newt juice, spider legs. But those were the main components. I think it actually also had some decomposing pine bark in there also. And it came from a local commercial supplier here in North Austin. You guys probably all know.
Do you guys use expanded shale a lot, and do you have an opinion about that?
We do. We're seeing it more and more. We used it a lot as a grower in what we called soilless media for native plants. It improved the drainage. It's kind of an inert ingredient that acts as a filler, which is good because it doesn't break down over time. and you don't have as bad of shrinkage. So we're seeing expanded shale a lot on the rooftop plantings, the bioswale mixes. And I would imagine in Debbie was her name, right before me, Debbie. In some of those applications, I could see expanded shale being a really good product to help with those where you want water to infiltrate, keep good soil texture, keep everything loose and air and organisms moving through. It's kind of expensive by the cubic yard, but when you start to add it in at smaller volumes, it can be really beneficial. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of energy involved in creating it. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of weird. No, weird's the wrong word. There's a lot of interesting ideas coming up about how to make these lightweight mixes for roof gardens and things. Perlite, vermiculite are some of the typical things, but again, those are high energy input things to create. So recycled foam is something that's being used. Some folks are actually mixing styrofoam peanuts into the soil for these roof plantings. I don't know how everyone feels about that, but it's an interesting idea. At Whole Foods over there, when we did that green roof, there's actually giant blocks of foam under there that just fill all that void space so that your soil is actually fairly shallow for the plantings, and you reduce all that weight off the structure by doing that. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of ideas there to come up with soil amendments that can help create that lightweight mix, but also hold water. You got that constant battle going. We need to improve that. If anybody here's a soil supplier, get to work on it. Any other questions? Sorry, I kind of jumped around and went a little fast there, but anything specific of the things we hit on there that you guys?
I had a question. It involves just looking at the overview of, I guess, commercial properties. Do you see more commercial properties investing in soil now than in the previous years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the clients, whoever that may be, whether it's a homeowner, it's a developer, or it's an HOA, whoever your client is, I think that we're all doing a really good job of educating and explaining to them that there's potential savings involved in spending a little bit up front on these soils and getting these things right. And with the droughts and all the various issues we're having, you'll see the difference on your water bill over time by getting this right is a good foundation. When you're creating a landscape from scratch, like a lot of those photos I showed too, you kind of have one chance to get it right, and then after that, all you can do is try to add things to it on top. You can't really dig it all back out and recreate that entire soil profile again.
Any other questions? I think that's it.
Okay. I have one question for the audience. So this was my first time to kind of go through this particular presentation. What aspect of all of this would be more beneficial to y'all? If I could focus on one specific before and after kind of stuff and during and okay. Well, believe it or not, I can kind of give you like the general overview on the mixes just because I've walked out there and like physically looked at it. But the soil suppliers are actually pretty fierce about guarding those secrets. Yeah, believe it or not, yeah. Yeah, if you go in and start kicking around their soil pile and filling up a plastic baggie, they come over pretty quick and want to know what you're doing, who you are. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's probably what I like about this industry, the green industry in general, the most, is just how everything you do is a constant science experiment. It's nonstop. So you may go out in your yard and realize the soil you've got is perfect. You don't even need to touch it. It happens. That's called pocket planting. Thank y'all. Appreciate you listening to me.
That's it. Now, Denise, you passed out the survey.
I did.
All right.
I just want to let you know if anybody needs TNLA, CEUs, I have the sign-up sheet down at this table, so sign up on your way out, and please fill out your evaluation. And thank you, Chris, for everything today. Do you have anything else? Hey, don't leave yet.
no.
Don't leave yet.
That's it for me.
All right, bye.